Okay, folks. Hello, friends and colleagues. Welcome to the Tourism Skillshop, hosted by State of Washington Tourism, SWT. My name is Matthew Ozuna, and I am the Destination Development Manager at SWT. I will introduce today's webinar on grant writing strategies. Please utilize the chat now that it's working. Well, I hope it's working. It should. Sometimes it does not. But if there's any issue, I can jump in and try to make sure it starts. Actually, I better do that now. Let's see. Chat. Yep, the chat is disabled. So I will enable it. I'll try to anyway. Chat.
While Matthew's working on the chat, it's great to have everyone here. Thank you so much. I see Amanda. Well, I don't see you, but I see your name. Anne, Brennan, Carol, Kathy. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. We're excited to talk about grant writing for sustainable tourism.
Thank you, Allison. And I think the chat is up and running, folks. So my apologies. It's only me today. Usually I have my sidekick, Mike Moe. He might join a little late, but the chat should be up and running. So yes, utilize the chat to say hello. Let us know where you're zooming in from today. Feel free to share your comments in the chat and use the Q&A feature as well. I mentioned Mike Moe. He should be here today. He might be joining a little late. He is the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Tourism Development at SWT. He will monitor the chat and help address any questions from the audience near the end of the webinar. I'd also like to offer a warm welcome to a special guest today from the Port of Seattle, Nick Leonti. He is the Director of Tourism Development and is here today in the Tourism Skillshop to promote the Port's Tourism Marketing Support Program, which will relaunch in just a few months. Now, let's talk about the series, the purpose, the background. The Tourism Skillshop is one of many industry educational programs from State of Washington Tourism. The webinar series will engage with colleagues across the tourism sector and broaden their industry knowledge, skills, and network. Each webinar will highlight a specific issue or skill for tourism professionals to ponder and discuss with industry experts. State of Washington Tourism will host live webinars of the Tourism Skillshop on the 3rd and 4th Thursdays of every month from 10 to 11 a.m. These webinars are free and open to all tourism stakeholders. The webinars will also be recorded and shared with registrants as well as other users on the SWT YouTube channel. For Tourism Skillshop and other industry updates, visit the SWT industry website, sign up for the industry update newsletter, and follow SWT on LinkedIn. Let's see here. Tourism stakeholders may also join the SWT Facebook group for further discussion on topics related to the Tourism Skillshop and other industry news, events, and issues. Now, this webinar in the Tourism Skillshop will focus on grant writing strategies for the tourism sector. It will provide industry professionals with tools, tips, and techniques for grant writing components such as budgets, statements of need, and status reports to the grantor. This skill shop is intended for individuals with a moderate understanding of grant writing. And with that, we have Allison Shirk, is the subject matter expert in this skill shop today. She holds a Master's of Education, specifically in adult education, and is a Grant Professionals Association approved trainer. She is the founder of Spark the Fire grant writing classes. Allison has over 25 years of experience as a grant writer and as a grant writing professor with Western Washington University, Evergreen College, and Seattle Central College. She is also a peer grant reviewer for several grant makers. Wow, exciting news. And Allison, welcome today. Glad you're here.
Thanks for
And,
having me.
and Nick, let's start off with you. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about your tourism marketing support program that will launch in January or relaunch in January?
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Matthew. I'm really pleased to be here, and thanks to Allison for letting me take a couple minutes before your presentation to talk about our grant program at the port. A little about me first. I'm new to Washington and to the Seattle area. I took on my role of Director of Tourism Development just a few months ago, and having made the move up from California, where I worked at Visit California. So this grant program has been in place at the port for a few years, but this has been 2022 is my first time. I kind of joined midstream this year. And as we're planning the program for 2023, that'll really be my first time going through. But I thought this would be a great opportunity here to share news about this grant program that we have with this group, since it pertains to so many who are here on the call. So let me share my screen, which is always an exciting time to see if it works. Here we go. I think we are, can everyone see that? I think we're good.
Yep.
Matt? Okay, great. So again, it's called the Tourism Marketing Support Program, and it's run by the Port of Seattle. The goal is to support statewide tourism with this grant. There is $200,000 worth of grants to be awarded each year. The maximum each awardee can get is up to $10,000, and that is a 2-to-1 match. So if the awardee contributes $1, the port contributes $2. So the maximum that this would be involved with is if the awardee contributes $5,000 in matching funds, they would get the full $10,000 in port funds for their program for that year. And this is the grant is open to all state of Washington destination marketing organizations, counties, cities, and other nonprofits. So if you're a tourism related business, this might be right up your alley, especially if you're a DMO. And then the scope is that all projects must promote tourism in the state. So it won't be used for meetings, events, things like that, specifically tourism programs and those that enhance the use of port facilities, which obviously are, Seattle Airport, the cruise terminals, the recreational marinas, and other port properties, which is a pretty wide scope, especially when you factor in the airport there. So lots of you in the room are eligible for applying for this. And I don't know, I'm assuming some folks in this room probably, I can't actually see who's in here, but a couple of weeks ago, the Port and State of Washington Tourism hosted the Responsible Outdoor Travel Summit. So I hope some of you attended that. And the focus of that was really, talking about strategies for the future of tourism and being sustainable, responsible, and equitable as the tourism grows and comes out of the pandemic in a better way than we went into the pandemic. So for these grants, that's a main focus, is smart tourism growth within the state. Looking at over tourism, looking at DEI, looking at all of the aspects that are part of tourism's future. The types of projects that people have done in the past and that they will continue to do in the future, you can use the funds for, to host media, especially international media. We're really focused on the international side of tourism marketing. So those are the visitors who, the whole thing, they stay longer, spend more, they have so much more vacation time. And even if they're working a cruise from Seattle into their itinerary, they can add time before and after to explore the state. So if you're working with media or you want to host travel trade familiarization tours, travel agents, tour operators, if you're involved in that, this would be a great use for these funds. Obviously, any campaign that's focused on tourism are great projects for this grant, as well as just promoting your attractions, or if you want to attend trade shows, conduct sales missions, or put together marketing collateral. Those are all And this isn't an extensive list. So when you're applying for the grants, let us know what you want to do. There will be a panel that goes over all the applications, and you make those decisions based on the previous, all the requirements on the previous page. So just real quick, I'm zipping right through this, just the timeline. The funds will be approved hopefully in January by our commission. Not foreseeing any issues there, and that's when we'll get permission to officially launch the application process. So that should happen in a couple months here in January of the new year. And then throughout February, we'll actually have informational sessions. I can't say that word apparently. And those will be run. Some of you probably worked with Gail Mueller in our office, who's helped administer these programs over the past few years. She'll conduct the informational session. See, I can't say it. I just can't. That's maybe next time. And the applications will be due maybe late February, possibly early March. That's still to be determined. And then we'll get the review committee together to look at all the applicants. Again, there's $200,000 worth of up to $10,000 grants. They don't have to be the $10,000 grants. If it's less than that, we could do that and get more people involved in the grant program. Then we plan to have all the agreements and contracts in place and signed by April. And then you'll have the rest of the year to complete your project. And we'll look for progress reports along the way. And then there'll be a final report due at the end where the contract will have agreed upon metrics that we will need a final report on at the end. So that's basically how the program works. And then the port, you prove the matching funds, and the port send the port an invoice, and you get you up to your $10,000 back. So it's a really great program, and I can see that it's done great things in the past, and being new, I'm really excited about being involved with this in the future. So I hope that you all take advantage of this, and we can see what kinds of creative projects you have in mind to promote tourism throughout the state.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick. And Nick, do you have access to the Q&A box? There was a question that popped up. I don't know if you want to.
I saw I saw the little box pop up, but I couldn't find the actual question.
It says, if awarded, may someone reapply in future years?
I see it now. Great. Yes. Yeah. You can get the grant every year, so you can keep reapplying.
Excellent.
It's just that easy.
Great, Nick. Thank you. Yeah.
Right,
After State of Washington tourism grants, Port of Seattle grants are next. So I encourage everyone to kind of consider the grants that Nick talked about, especially if the folks that missed out on this round of grants from State of Washington tourism. Yeah, make sure you utilize those from Port of Seattle.
And if people aren't on our mailing list and you want to know when the application is available, obviously you can check our website in January. There should be an announcement, but definitely reach out to me, and we'll make sure that we let you know when the application process opens. So
excellent.
And again, thank you for letting me have a few minutes here. I know Allison's got a lot of information to share, so thanks so much for letting me slip in here.
No, you're very welcome, Nick, and welcome to Washington, the new position. We can't wait to work with you in the years ahead.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, folks. Now, I want to share a few of my grant writing strategies before Allison kind of takes the stage. If Allison is the subject matter expert and the professor on grant writing, I'm kind of the graduate student assistant, and I'm going to do a 101 grant writing class, and she's going to teach a 301 or 401. But I just wanted to take a few minutes just to share my experience of grant writing. This skill doesn't just kind of happen overnight. And as some of you know, you're always kind of honing it and improving upon it with every year, on every grant, on every team, on every project. So I just have 3 slides. It'll be super quick, but I just want to give you all some background on my grant writing experience and some of the thought processes that I take into account. And so really, when I start a grant or a project, I kind of really look at it at kind of a big beginning, middle, and an end, not just the grant writing itself, but I usually meet with a group of staff or board members, and I ask a few questions. We brainstorm, we strategize, and then I plan, and then I do the writing, and then there's managing the project, administering the grant funds, and then there's the reporting. But I think the most important, and I think, especially when we're talking about strategies in this workshop, is just to kind of just to be frank and real with your team, and to really ask a few critical questions, like what are your needs? What are your resources? Are grants the best funding option for your tourism project? Are you prepared to receive a grant award that is less than your grant amount, or excuse me, your grant request? Are you ready to receive a grant award that is less than your original grant request? How will you sustain the program or project after the funding ends? Right? Do you have resource available if applying for a matching grant? And then what criteria are required in the reporting, and can you meet the funders' procedures and timelines? So those are the questions that I always think about before it's just like, oh boy, what did I get myself into? This is a massive federal grant. Like, oh gosh, I should have thought about this a little bit earlier and was more strategic with it. And then marshaling resources too, like I said, whether it's a match and you're looking for in-kind contributions or cash, pulling those together, or looking for other sources of grant funding, such as corporate foundations, government grants, community and private foundations. I think those are some options too. Allison will kind of mention those later on in her presentation, but just be in mind that corporate foundations usually establish a specific funding priorities. Government grants are very narrowly focused. Community and private foundations usually emphasize personal contact and long-term relationship building. And then there's the grant writing itself. That's a beast on its own. Take time to read all the instructions thoroughly and very carefully. Take advantage of the technical assistance through phone calls, meetings, workshops. Available, review past successful applications on the funder's website, and ask the funder if for help or feedback if permitted, if appropriate. And so the last grant project that I worked on, or grant proposal that I worked on, was a federal grant in relation to scenic byways, and it was huge. And I really kind of organized. I didn't take the grant on in one day or 1 week. It was over maybe 1 to 3 weeks, and I really kind of broke it into chunks. And so that's how I kind of organized my grant writing after I marshaled resources and asked these critical questions. And so then here are just 5 other basic tips that I've learned, that I've kind of received from mentors over the last few years, that I want to share with you all. It's really important. Spell out the need for the grant, utilize data, context, perhaps even a little bit of storytelling to express the need for this project in relation to your community or organization, right? Be sure your budget makes sense. Dollar amounts from income should align with dollar amounts from expenses. There should kind of be, they should balance each other out. If you're building a shelter at a park for an event, the shelter, on your expenses, you should see, stuff for nails and hammers and lumber, and not, $75 boxes of paper clips, stuff like that. Just kind of be aware of that. And then recruit an objective reviewer. In the past, I've used a close friend that doesn't have anything to do with tourism, and that person just kind of not only was looked for spelling and grammar and things like that, but did it make sense? Could I explain something a little differently? Because an outsider's perspective is really important before submitting the grant to another outsider. That's the way I think about it. And then don't procrastinate. I think we all know this. It's easier said than done. The quality of your work may suffer if it's rushed. You won't have adequate time for edits or rewrites before submittal. Like I said before, with a huge federal grant that I worked on a few months ago, I broke it into chunks over 1 to 3 weeks. There was a strategizing piece. Then there was a time where I just kind of gathered resources and organized it and kind of prepared it for the actual writing. And then there was the writing, and then there was the editing. And so Allison will probably go into detail about this as well, but just organize and kind of have some deadlines, internal deadlines in place, and don't procrastinate. And then finally, pay close attention to the details. That's another way of saying read, and then reread the instructions with the grant. So that's all, folks. I'm going to turn it over to Allison now. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks so much, Matt. Great tips that you shared. And yeah, so I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump into some grant writing strategies for Washington tourism. Can you all see my screen? Great, perfect. Okay, so I do have some worksheets if you want to download the slide deck and my notes. If you go to this website, sparkthefiregrantwriting.com/Washington, you can get a hold of these slides so you can look at them carefully. I'm going to move pretty fast through the slides, so you might want to grab those. And Matthew, would you be able to put that link in the chat for me?
Yeah, let's see here. Well, maybe. Is it on the Google Doc, our planning doc?
You know what?
Oh, someone did.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'll put that in there. Now it's in there twice. Okay, so before we talk about grant writing, I did want to talk a little bit about where do you find grants in the first place. So these are the 5 basic categories of grant makers. And they are, for example, clubs and associations like Rotary. You can find by searching your local newspaper or the yellow pages. You may know that Washington state tribes give away 1% of their gaming income to charitable causes. Corporations also give out grants, particularly to fund public relations impact. And then foundations are a legal organizational structure in which 3% of the foundation's assets are given away to charity each year. Government entities, of course, give grants to fix problems and stimulate the economy. This might surprise you. So kind of honing in specifically on foundations, 90% of foundations do not have a website. And so if you think about that, what that means is that if you're, getting on Google and you're searching for grant opportunities, you're actually missing 90% of what is out there. And so you might wonder, well, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't foundations have a website? Anyone have an idea on that? You can use the chat. Why would foundations not have a website?
Maybe because they don't want to be bombarded by people looking for or asking for money.
Exactly, right. Yeah, so accepting grant applications, reviewing them, getting reports from grantees is a huge undertaking, as Matthew, you can attest to. So the answer really is that every foundation has its own way of doing things. There are no requirements that foundations advertise themselves. The main requirement is they set up their giving strategies and their founding documents, and they are required to give away 3% of their assets to charities every year. And when I say charities, 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So if foundations don't have websites, how in the world do we find them? And the answer is that every foundation is required to do their taxes just like us, and that information is public. And I see Jolene said in the chat, because it's about relationship building. Amanda said, so they can drive the applications, and both of those are excellent points. So with these 990 tax returns, you can Google 990 Finder, or you can Google guidestar.com and take a look at them. On the 990, you can see what organizations received the grant, how much the grant award was for, and the city and state that the recipient is located. So when I started writing grants 25 years ago, you can imagine that it was a little bit difficult to read through tax statements. And to read them, you had to know the name of the foundation first. So as grant writers, we would go to the library and use this giant book called the Washington Foundation Data Book, which you could not check out of the library. You had to sit there at a table going back and forth between the index and the listings and take really good notes. Or if an organization had a capital campaign, built a new building, we would actually maybe sneak in with a pad of paper and write down all the names on the marble wall. Then we would take those names and go find their tax returns and read their tax returns. And it was not a very time efficient process. So today, with the advent of OCR, optical character recognition technology, some companies have formed that scan all those tax returns into a database that is searchable by the field of interest, the geographic interest, the amount of the grant, the type of grant, capital versus general operating, and so on. And so now we can use those databases to, for example, search for foundations that have funded aquatic centers in Washington State. That's a search that you could put in, and you would then get a list of all the foundations in Washington State that had funded aquatic centers. So I want to talk about these. We're going to start with the last three first. And so the one at the top of these is GrantStation. And GrantStation is a great prospect research database with an accessible price tag. It's $195 for a full year. And this directory includes both government grant opportunities and foundations. So this is a great place to start if you want to get into looking at these databases. The next one on the list is the Foundation Directory by Candid, and it's probably been around the longest. It's dependable, it's comprehensive, and it's a little more expensive. It runs about $195 a month as opposed to $195 per year. This next one on the list, Instrumental, is newer to the scene, but I really like it. It's robust like the Foundation Directory by Candid, and it includes some nice features like grants management software. It actually sends you emails that remind you of upcoming deadlines, and behind the scenes, it finds new grant opportunities for you to review, and it sends them to you to look at them. So this one also runs upwards of $200 a month. And so when you think about why is GrantStation $195 a year and these other ones are per month? The difference in the cost is directly related to how many listings the database has. So for example, GrantStation has about 40,000 listings, and Candid Foundation Directory Online has over 200,000. Instrumental's not telling. So going back up to the top of the list, now we have grants.gov, and that's free and available to everyone. That's where you can find all the federal grant opportunities published, free to search. For local governments, you're going to want to search through your local government's website. I also use the Washington State Department of Commerce website quite a bit. They list open grants and funding opportunities at commercegrants.com. And you won't find everything there, though. So if you know, for example, you're involved in sustainable tourism, you need to go to that department of the state and look at their website, the State of Washington Tourism Department, to see exactly what they're doing. I do have some discount codes for students. So for example, GrantStation, if you use this link, you can get this full year membership for only $95 instead of $195. And Instrumental, if you use this link, instrumental.com/sparkthefire3W, you can get a free 3-week trial of Instrumental instead of the normal 2-week trial. So it gives you an extra week. And there's also a discount code for $50 off the first month. And so everyone that's here, you're welcome to use that. Also, I want to let you know that candid.org, while they don't have a discount program or a free trial, they do offer this database in some libraries, not all. And so if you go to this website, candid.org/find us, you're going to find a map where you can type in your zip code and see where is the database located closest to you at a public library. It's typically the head of the library system. So around here at Seattle and Redmond for King County, Poulsbo, Yakima, Spokane. So go to that website and you can see where it's located at a public library. You can go in and you have 4 hours to go in and use it for free. And what you're going to find in these databases are their preferences and restrictions, the who, what, when, where, and how to apply. So now that we've talked about where to find grants, I want to give you 10 quick strategy tips to think about while you're writing grants. So the first one, we'll kind of count them down, is framing. And Matthew touched on this too, but focusing on the community need, not the organization's need. And honestly, this is the biggest pitfall with grant writing that I see, is how you frame your grant proposal. Grant makers do not exist to give grants to organizations and businesses, though it may seem that way. In fact, grant makers, and I'm using that term to encompass all types of entities that give grants, grant makers give money to fix problems in the community, stimulate the economy, create jobs, etc. So your grant must focus on how you're going to do those things. Address the community's need, not your organization's need. So for example, let's say you would like to get a 12-passenger van for your organization, and you write a grant and you explain to the funder, I really need this 12-passenger van for my organization. That's focusing on the organization's need. If you shift that to, well, the reason why we need the van is because we need to pick up people at this location and take them to this location, and it focuses on the public, the community need, that is going to be way more compelling for the grant maker. Number 2, I want to talk about budget. So when you have to complete a budget worksheet, you have to plan to raise the money that's needed, and that's got to include the grant you're writing. So this is a sample budget that was provided with the last State of Washington tourism grant, the application on the left side. And I have added this one on the right side to show an example of maybe what not to do or what to try not to do. On the right side, you can see that the applicant filling this out did not show a need for this grant. It wasn't included in a line item, where on this side it is. They're asking for $10,000. This one does not. And you can see that they have all the money that they need to complete this project. Their project costs $20,000 and they have $20,000 planned. When a grant maker sees this, they may not fund the application because it looks like you don't need the money, especially in comparison to an organization that does need the money. So instead, present a balanced budget. The income equals the expenses, and make sure that you've included this grant request in the income sources. One more thing about budgets. This is the sample, the way that you received it. It has this column on the right that is for actuals. And this is where you document and report to the grant maker exactly how you spend the funding. So make sure that you save all of your receipts and that you account for every penny that you spend. And make sure that the grant is spent by the deadline that is set by the grant maker. So thinking at the very beginning of your grant as you're writing it, how you're going to track every expenditure and keep your data that you need to keep is really, it's smart. Let's also remember some best practices about using grant funds from the government. You want to make sure that you have a competitive process to select contractors. In fact, it's best if you have not chosen the contractor at the time of the proposal. Instead, you should get 3 competitive bids, present a bid summary with your grant request, and try to use Washington state contractors and prioritize minority and women-owned businesses. Number 3, focus on what the grant maker wants to achieve. Use keywords from the guidelines. So I go through and I highlight those words: collaboration, accessibility, inclusion, underrepresented communities, execute, comply. And I'm going to use those keywords right in my grant proposal. So for example, if I'm writing a grant for sustainable tourism, that should be the main focus of the grant, and sustainable tourism, those words should appear quite often in your grant application. Also, sometimes grant makers actually show you the score, the rubric that they use to score your application. And so take a really close look at this and make sure that you maximize all the points you can. Because when these grants get reviewed, the applications with the highest score get the grants. And it's just that simple. They start at the highest score and they work their way down until the money's gone. So make sure that you're getting as many points as possible. Outline your answer. Matt touched on this, but for example, this question, they're noting objectives, budget, partners, statement of need, and they're giving you 400 words. 400 words allowed divided by 70, which is basically a paragraph is about 5 or 6 paragraphs. Now you can plot out project description, the objectives, the budget, the partners, and the statement of need, and make sure that you have answered every piece of this question. And notice that I've put in red these highlighted words that I found in the frequently asked questions and in the guidelines, because I want to make sure that I use those keywords in the proposal. Matthew already said to submit early, and that's so true. Plan it out in advance. Refrain from waiting to the last minute to submit your grant. I like to use a Gantt chart to plan the submission, and this is an example of a Gantt chart. Note that some of the first things you do are read the guidelines, ask for letters of support, prepare the attachments, and work on the project budget. Don't wait to do those things at the last minute. There's a tendency to do that because you want to get to the writing part. But if you do these in advance, your proposal is going to be much better. Partnerships are so important. Make sure that you're taking the time to partner with other organizations when you write about partnerships in your grant proposal. Grant makers don't want to just see a long list of who you partner with. The way to sort of level up your partnerships writing is to talk about specific examples of how those partnerships serve your mutual audience. So for example, for sustainable tourism grants, you want to make sure that you're partnering with your local DMO, thinking about the restaurants and the hotels in your area, organizations serving underserved populations, how can you partner with them to make the tourism more accessible, and other types of organizations like your local government, the tribes, and the nonprofits in your community. So as you write your grant proposal, you're going to have your goal and you're going to have your objectives. The goal is overarching. In the case of the state of Washington, the overarching goal is sustainable tourism. And your objectives are the steps that lead you to that goal. They're the steps that you're going to take to increase sustainable tourism. You might have heard before SMART objectives: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time limited. And now we've added an IE, and the IE are for inclusive and equitable. Your evaluation should specifically state what you're going to report on. So these are some examples of some outputs that are based on the objectives that you write. 40% of ticket sales were purchased from out of state. 10% of tickets were distributed to underserved community members. 50% of the performances that we had selected were given by BIPOC directors, which means Black, Indigenous, persons of color. And 30 performances were presented. These are all outputs. This is data that you're going to collect and report to the grant maker. And even better is when you can present outcomes. So it's not just that you put on a show and you're actually finding out if the audience liked the show, and did the local businesses make more money than usual as a result of, for example, a festival that you hosted in your community. In order to measure these types of outcomes, you have to make plans to collect this data beforehand. And I guess I just wanted to mention, sometimes getting this data is creative. For example, there's a festival here on Vashon Island, and one of the ways that we figure out how many people came to the festival, because it's an unticketed event, is we actually measure how many times the porta potties were serviced. You can come up with a calculation for an estimate of how many people attended a festival by the number of porta potty flushes, so to speak. Also, so these are some different types of evaluation tools. Now, I know when people hear evaluation, you think, oh my gosh, are we going to have to give surveys to everyone that comes to our festival? A lot of times that kind of thing is not realistic for the event that you're producing. So instead, consider interviewing key stakeholders, hold a focus group, keep a journal, and train your on-site team to record what's happening on the spot. Yeah. And Matt, I only have 2 more slides, so I think we're doing
That's
okay.
perfect. Yeah, you have 3 minutes, so you're fine.
Great. Just some tips for reporting. We talked about this a little bit already, but it's worth repeating. Make sure you track your expenses, gather your data, document your evaluation methods, and gather pictures and stories and quotes from your audience members so that you can include those in your report and in your next grant proposal. It's always nice to be able to tell a story in your grant proposal by having those client quotes and pictures and things that really bring to life your proposal, so that your reader who's reading the grant application has a great visual of exactly what's going to happen, can imagine it, and care about what it is that you're presenting. Plan in advance how success is determined so that both you and the grant maker are clear on what specifically determines success. In fact, if you write your objectives with that SMARTY format, you can basically put those in past tense, and there's your grant report. Your grant maker is going to be happy because they know exactly what it is to expect, and you're going to be happy because you know exactly what you have to do. So that's all I have in terms of tips. I do want to do a quick plug for Spark the Fire grant writing classes. I teach an 8-week grant writing course in which each student writes a complete grant proposal, and that receives my individualized feedback and feedback from your fellow classmates. I have students from all over the country, Canada, and international. If you're going to invest in a grant writing class, make sure that you're getting feedback on your writing. I don't believe you can learn how to write without somebody reading what you've written and giving you feedback on it. So it's the best way to garner more grant income for your organization and your community. Okay, I'm ready for questions and answers. How about you?
Thanks, Allison. That was wonderful. I had I mean, I had a great time learning it. I feel like I'm back in the classroom again. So that was great. You're very much a professor and a teacher.
Thank
Okay,
you.
folks, we are right around the 10-minute mark remaining in our webinar today. Now's the time for questions directed to Allison. Maybe Nick as well. I could answer a question or two if you have a question for him. I can try my best to answer a question if you have something related to the last grant cycle with State of Washington tourism. Actually, I'll just come out and say that now. There's probably a few questions for me, but there was a press release that went out yesterday that talked about the $270,000 for 25 grant recipients, split between two grant programs, the Tourism Sustainability Grant and the Technical Assistance Grant. There will be a summary document with all of the grantees, the award amounts, and a summary of grant projects. So that will be coming shortly. We don't have it quite yet. We're still in a few negotiations with grantees, and I need to get grant contracts signed. And we also had a state tourism conference not too long ago. So there's been a lot of things going on. I will put a copy. I'll somehow either pop it in the chat, the link to the press release, or you'll see it in the recording, or you'll get it in an email with the recording. Yeah, I'll get you the press release for sure. Okay, Allison, before the questions start to come in, and I'll kind of keep my eye on the chat and the Q&A. I had a question for you about in-kind contributions and how a grant maker quantifies that. And is there kind of a standard set by the federal government? Or is it, based on every community, for like, does an hour worked by a volunteer equate to the hourly wage in one state or one community, or could it be higher? I mean, can you give us just a quick, your take on that?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of in-kind donations for people, right? If it's a material object, then it's just the value of that object if you were to purchase it. But in terms of manpower, I'm going to share my screen real quick. I think I have this pulled up. This is the independent sector, and they are a national organization that sets the rate of volunteer time. And so you can see that the national volunteer hour for each volunteer is actually $29.95.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, probably more than you thought. And so
Yes.
that is for basically anyone that's doing anything. It's not a specialized person. So if, for example, you were running a dental clinic and you had a dentist putting in volunteer hours, you would actually use that person's rate. Everyone else is $29.95. And this breaks down into state by state. So each state actually has their own rate, a little bit up or a little bit down, but this is the national value of a volunteer hour. How about that?
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Good to know. Good to know. Okay, folks, questions for Allison? Let's see here. Oh, yeah, there was one in the chat.
I think that was for you. How do we get a copy of the press release? And then there was a link.
Yes, and then I see one in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
From Andy Day about language, style, rich text, more concise bullet points. Oh yeah, that's a good point, Andy. And that's something I had another question for Allison. I might as well, on behalf of Andy, what happens if I'm not a skilled writer? And, but I have a lot of things that I want to share with the grantor in my application. Can I do that by way of bullet points? Is that acceptable? Or do I rely more on some charts and graphs? What say you, Allison?
Okay, so in the past, having perfect grammar and spelling has been invaluable when you're writing a grant application, because as someone reviewing grants, it's easier to focus on the information that's being presented. In general, language and style, grants should be written in first person plural or third person. I personally like first person plural because it sounds more conversational and you can get a little bit more emotion across than referring to yourself in the third person. Bullet points and lists are great when they're used selectively. So for example, you wouldn't want your whole grant proposal to be in bullets, but that is a great way to break up the text a little bit. But I do want to say I'm seeing a lot of grant makers lately wanting to make grants more accessible to underserved communities. And so they are telling us as grant reviewers to focus less on the writing and focus more on the content. What is it that this person is saying and what is it that they want to do and the value of that? So I'd still work on, use Grammarly. I love Grammarly because it edits. It's a cloud-based editing software that edits your writing. Get someone else to read your proposal. But what's the most important thing, I think, is the ideas that you're getting across.
Cool. Thank you, Allison. I'm looking at the chat. I'm trying to respond and give you my attention as well. Jesse, I'm replying to you in the chat, but before I do, any other questions for Allison? We still have a few more minutes. I have another question or two, but I want to make sure our audience members have all the time they need for questions. And folks, if you have a more complicated question, complex question, I can also unmute you and you can voice that question to Allison as well. I can even turn on your camera if that's necessary. So that's an option as well. Okay, Allison, how about another question that I had about yeah, so we talked about bullet points, and so how much and I mentioned storytelling really briefly in the beginning, especially when you're kind of framing the statement of need and really kind of incorporating community need, not just your organization's need. So how nuanced should my storytelling be? How much leeway, how much creativity, how much passion should be conveyed in a grant application? I mean, I say that because, when I started early on, I remember rereading my grant application and then having other people's read it. It sounded really needy. I mean, and I was focusing on the problems and I wasn't as optimistic and solutions focused as I should be. Can you kind of touch on that as well?
Sure. Well, storytelling, since the beginning of humankind, stories draw us in. So incorporating storytelling into your grant proposal is smart to do, and make sure that the hero of your story is not necessarily the organization. It's the community member that is benefiting as an audience member of your work. I like for the tension to build a little with that community needs statement before. So you're convincing them that a problem exists or an opportunity exists in the community, get them hooked. But then, yeah, definitely the project description and the evaluation, the resolution, and the closing of the story are critical too. And so you want to make sure that just as if you were considering investing in a business, you would want to know exactly how that money was going to be spent. And you would want to know that that business had a plan to use the money effectively. It's just the same with nonprofits and tourism organizations. The same rules apply. We're talking about money, and so we want to know, what is your plan? How are you going to spend it? What's your timeline? And all of that should be worked out to the T, so that when I read that, I'm convinced and I know that you're capable of completing this grant and having success.
Great, thank you. We have time for another question or two, folks. Another question or two for Allison.
Well, how about you, Matthew? How do you feel about storytelling and your when you receive grants?
Well, I mean, Yes, and if you're talking about me personally, when I apply for my own grants, when it comes to like showcasing all the wonders of Washington, sometimes I have to pinch myself and make sure that I'm not too overly dramatic or passionate, because I like that stuff within the word limit, right? Kind of like you said, look at that word limit, kind of break it down by addressing certain aspects of the question or key words in the question, and then kind of divvy up your response that way within, state of Washington tourism had a 400 word limit. But yeah, I love that stuff. I'm all for it. I'm the guy that, fell into tourism and fell in love with it. I believe travel and tourism can transform, inspire, enlighten. And, that's what we're here to do today, talk about tourism grants and how those can benefit a community and organizations. So no, I'm all for it. Hey, just one other question though too, and I know we've hit the hour mark too, and I know we started just a little late, so maybe folks might stick on. There's one more question that I can kind of give to the audience, but Allison, you kind of talked about your grant writing classes, and folks on the line probably don't have a lot of resources. They're kind of overworked, understaffed, and then they're kind of taking on these grant projects and grant writing. Tell us more about the option to hire a grant writer, when that should happen, and how much would it cost?
Sure. So if you're going to hire someone, try not to wait till the last minute. They might charge you a rush fee if you do that. It's better to bring someone in early on in the project. Let's see, in Washington State, there is the Puget Sound Grant Writers Association that has a list of freelance grant writers that are available. Nationally, there's the Grant Professionals Association, which has a list of grant writers that are available. My website has a list of my students who have graduated and are available both as freelancers and employees. If you're going to hire a freelance grant writer, the going rate could be anything from $50 an hour to upwards of $200, and that's directly related to their years of experience, which is directly related to how quickly they're going to write a grant. So if you hire someone with a lot of experience, they write a lot faster, even though their rate is higher. It might all balance out at the end. But what I think is, even if you hire a freelancer, somebody has to tell them what to write. So learn how to write the grant yourself. You're going to go much farther in the long run if you learn that skill yourself, because all that information is what you have. And it's just as hard to write the grant as it is to tell someone else that information and have them write it. So.
Excellent. Well put. Yeah. For a while there, when I was thinking about hiring grant writers, I'm just like, well, does their hourly pay equate to the actual my grant request or amount? Does that justify the cost, or is there an equation involved? But no, it's based on experience and the professional's rate, and maybe there is some room for compromise and negotiation, especially if you win the grant. And what happens if you kind of pay for this person and put all this time and effort in and you don't get anything?
Right. Well, it's actually not ethical for grant writers to work on commission. So
okay, good to know.
we can only work by the hour or by the project. And if you think about it, the grant writer could do a perfect job writing your grant, and whether or not they get it has nothing to do with their work. It has to do with how well the organization is fitting into the parameters of what the grant maker wants to fund.
Well said. All right, folks. I see one comment. Oh, thank you, Christina, for attending today. We might have one quick question if anyone wants to ask. Otherwise, we'll kind of give everyone back their time. I'm looking at the Q&A. I'm looking at the chat. Oh, thank you, Shelley, for attending. I'll see you later this afternoon.
I think we're good.
Okay, folks. Yeah, seeing none, we'll kind of conclude this webinar in the Tourism Skillshop on grant writing strategies. Stay tuned. We still have one more webinar in the Tourism Skillshop for this year. It will be in November, on November 17th, Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning. It will be our last one in 2022. We'll take a break in December and you'll see us again in January. The November 17th webinar of the Tourism Skillshop will focus on website design. So stay tuned for that. You'll get a reminder in the industry update, as well as an email blast, probably a week before the webinar. So thank you for attending this webinar. And Allison, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I hope this is the beginning of a long-term relationship with State of Washington Tourism and all the Washington state tourism stakeholders on this webinar. So thank you. And Allison, do you mind holding on the webinar? Don't leave just yet. Why don't you stick around a little longer so we can debrief and talk?
Gotcha.
Cool. Thanks. All right. See you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.